Sir, you need to leave this cabin immediately.
Get out of that seat before I have you removed. The words cut through the cabin before the engines had even started. Vanessa Cole stood in the narrow aisle of the Gulf Stream, one hand gripping a cream leather headrest, the other pointing toward the rear. Her smile was gone. Her voice had that polished edge people use when they want cruelty to sound professional. Ethan Brooks looked up from his tablet. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. Outside the oval window, morning light washed the private tarmac at Teterboro in pale gold. A fuel truck rolled past. Somewhere below, a generator hummed. Inside, the cabin smelled of leather, coffee, and expensive air freshener. Vanessa leaned closer. Sir, this is the owner's suite. Gather your things and move to the back. Ethan wore a plain, dark hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers with worn soles. To Vanessa, that was enough evidence. She had already tried him, convicted him, and placed him where she believed he belonged. A young flight attendant named Olivia Reed froze near the galley, holding a tray with 2 glasses of ice water. The cubes clicked softly against crystal. Her eyes moved from Ethan to Vanessa, then to the tablet mounted near the service station. The manifest was right there. Vanessa had not checked it. Ethan set his tablet on the armrest. I'm in the correct seat, he said. Vanessa gave a small laugh. People say that every day. The words were quiet but not private. They landed like dust on white carpet. In the rear section, an older couple looked up from their newspapers. The woman's mouth opened, then closed. Her husband adjusted his glasses and stared down at a page he was no longer reading. Ethan reached into his pocket and brought out his phone. Slow, careful. He had learned to move that way in rooms where people already imagined him dangerous. He opened the booking confirmation and turned the screen toward her. Flight number, tail number, departure time, seat assignment, his name. Vanessa barely looked. That proves you have a reservation, she said. It does not prove you belong in this seat. She had seen that look before, in airports, restaurants, and offices where kindness depended on status. It was not open hatred. It was smaller, cleaner, easier to deny. That made it more dangerous. A person could hide behind policy while stripping another person of dignity, one careful sentence at a time. And everyone nearby could feel it, even the ones pretending they could not. Still, so she stood there, silent, and that silence became part of the wrong. Show proof, then show more proof. Then stay grateful when they still doubt you. Vanessa pointed again. I am not going to argue. Move now. Ethan's voice stayed low. No. One word. Not loud. Not angry. Final. The air changed. Vanessa blinked as if he had insulted her. A red flush climbed her neck. Excuse me? I said no. The ice in Olivia's glasses clicked again. Her hands trembled. Fine, Vanessa said. I'll help you relocate. She grabbed the handle. Ethan stood. The movement was calm, but the cabin seemed to shrink. He was tall, broad-shouldered, still in the way a locked door is still. Put the bag down. Vanessa stopped halfway down the aisle. Then pride killed it. She dropped the bag. It hit the carpet with a heavy thud. The older woman gasped. Olivia flinched. Ethan looked at the bag, then back at Vanessa. Something in his eyes went colder. Not wild. Not reckless. Controlled. That was worse. You should be very careful, he said. Vanessa heard the warning as a challenge. Vanessa turned toward Olivia. Call Captain Hayes. Olivia did not move. Now, Vanessa snapped. Olivia set the tray down with a soft clatter. Her fingers hovered near the intercom, but her eyes went to the manifest screen. Ethan Brooks, primary owner contact. Special handling. No public recognition requested. Her stomach dropped. Vanessa, she whispered. Maybe we should check the passenger profile first. Vanessa's head turned slowly. What did you say? I just think we should verify before this goes further. Vanessa laughed without humor. I do not need a trainee telling me how to recognize a problem passenger. The words hit Olivia deeper than a shout. They reminded her of every time she had stayed quiet to survive. Then Vanessa stepped too close. Last chance, she said. Get out of the owner's suite. Ethan did not move. Vanessa raised her hand. The slap cracked through the cabin. Sharp, clean, unbelievable. Ethan's head turned slightly. The sound hung in the air after the motion ended. Olivia covered her mouth. The older man stood halfway, then froze. Even Vanessa looked startled by what her own hand had done. Ethan touched his cheek. A faint red mark was rising. Then Ethan picked up his phone. His thumb moved once. The cabin phone rang near the cockpit. A moment later, Captain Daniel Hayes stepped out. Gray hair neat, uniform pressed, eyes alert.
What is going on here?
Vanessa spoke first. Captain, this passenger became non-compliant and refused to leave the owner's suite. Olivia's voice broke through. Captain, check the manifest. Everyone turned. Olivia was pale but standing straighter now. Please, she said.
Check it.
Captain Hayes looked at the screen near the galley. His face changed before he spoke. He looked at Ethan, then at Vanessa. Miss Cole, he said slowly. This is Mr. Ethan Brooks. Vanessa frowned. Captain Hayes swallowed. He is the principal owner of Brooks Aviation Group. He owns this aircraft, and as of this morning, he owns controlling interest in Altair Lux Aviation. The cabin went silent, not quiet, silent. Vanessa's lips parted, but nothing came out. Ethan lowered his phone. His cheek was still red. His voice was still calm. That is not the part that matters most, Captain. He looked from Vanessa to Olivia, then to the older couple. What matters is who she thought I was when she believed I had no power. The engines had not started, but something much larger already had. Captain Hayes did not move for several seconds. He stood in the aisle with one hand still resting on the cockpit door, his eyes fixed on Vanessa Cole, as if he were seeing her for the first time. The cabin around him felt too small, too polished, too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something breaks, and everyone knows it cannot be put back the way it was. Vanessa tried to speak. Captain, I did not know that he was. Doc. Ethan raised one hand, not high, not dramatic, just enough to stop her. That is exactly the problem, he said. His voice was even, but every word carried weight. It did not sound like rage. It sounded like a record being made. Vanessa swallowed. Her cheeks had lost their color. A few minutes earlier, she had filled the cabin with command. Now she seemed smaller inside her uniform, as if the gold wings pinned to her chest had become too heavy. Olivia Reed stood near the galley, one hand pressed against the counter. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. She had seen rude passengers. She had seen tired crew members snap. But this was different. This was not stress. This was choice after choice after choice. And she knew she had almost let it happen in silence. Captain Hayes turned toward Ethan. Mr. Brooks, I am deeply sorry. Ethan looked at him. I appreciate the apology, Captain, but I need procedure, not comfort. The words hit the captain hard because he understood them. In aviation, procedure mattered. It protected lives. It protected truth. And when people ignored it, harm did not stay small. He straightened his shoulders. Yes, sir. Then he turned to Vanessa. Miss Cole, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Please return to the galley and surrender your crew tablet. Vanessa blinked. Daniel, wait. You cannot just do that. The captain's jaw tightened. Do not call me Daniel right now. That sentence cracked through the cabin. Vanessa looked toward Olivia, then toward the older couple in the rear, searching for someone to soften the moment. No one did. The older woman held her husband's hand now. Her eyes were wet, not from fear, but from shame. She had watched too much and said too little. Vanessa took one step back. He refused the crew instruction, she said, but her voice was thinner now. I was protecting the aircraft. Ethan slowly picked up his leather bag from the floor. The handle had bent to one side. A seam near the zipper had pulled loose. It was a small thing, cheap compared to the jet, cheap compared to the company. But for a moment, Ethan looked at it like it mattered. Because it did, not because of the cost, because of the contempt. He placed it on the seat beside him and said, You were not protecting the aircraft. You were protecting an assumption. Olivia lowered her eyes. That sentence stayed with her. Vanessa's hand shook as she unclipped the crew tablet from her belt. She held it out toward the captain. He did not take it right away. Unlock it, he said. Her eyes sharpened. For what reason? For the incident log. Vanessa hesitated for half a second too long. Ethan noticed. So did Olivia. So did the captain. Unlock it, Captain Hayes repeated. Vanessa entered her code with stiff fingers. The screen lit up. The captain took it and tapped through the open reports. His face hardened. Olivia leaned slightly, just enough to see. There it was. Passenger became aggressive during seat verification. Passenger refused relocation. Possible security risk. Captain Hayes looked up. You filed this before I came out here. Vanessa said nothing. You filed a security note against him while he was seated, calm, and verified on the manifest. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came. The older man in the rear finally spoke. His voice trembled, but it was clear. That is not what happened. Everyone turned. He stood slowly, one hand on the armrest, the other still holding his folded newspaper. My wife and I saw it. He never raised his voice. He showed her his phone. She threw his bag. Then she struck him. His wife nodded, tears now rolling down the soft lines of her face. I should have said something sooner, she whispered. I am sorry, sir. Ethan looked at her. For the first time, his expression changed. Not softened completely, but shifted. I believe you, he said. Those 3 words did something to her. Her shoulders fell. Not from relief, exactly, but from the pain of being allowed to be honest. Olivia took a breath, then another. Her hand went to her jacket pocket. I recorded part of it, she said. Vanessa spun toward her. You did what? Olivia flinched, but she did not step back. I started recording after you dropped his bag, you little traitor. Captain Hayes snapped, enough. The word was so sharp, Vanessa froze. Olivia's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. I did not do it to hurt you. I did it because I knew no one would believe him if this turned into your word against his. The truth sat in the cabin like a second passenger. Heavy, uninvited, necessary. Ethan looked at Olivia for a long moment. She expected anger. She expected suspicion. She expected the kind of look people give when damage is already done and no apology can reach it. Instead, he said, "Thank you for choosing the truth after fear told you not to." Olivia pressed her lips together. Her chin trembled once. She nodded. Vanessa laughed once, harsh and brittle. This is ridiculous. I have been with this company for 14 years. I know how these situations work. Ethan turned toward her. No, Miss Cole. You know how they used to work. The cabin went still again. Outside, a ground crew member crossed beneath the window, unaware that inside the aircraft a career was ending and something larger was beginning. Captain Hayes picked up the cabin phone. Operations, this is Captain Hayes on Aircraft 7 Apex. We have a crew removal and a passenger assault allegation. Departure is suspended. I need ground management and corporate legal notified now. Vanessa's face changed completely. Assault. That word carried weight in America. It was no longer attitude, no longer customer service, no longer a misunderstanding to be buried in an email. It was a line, and she had crossed it with her own hand. Captain, she whispered, please. He did not look away. You will wait in the forward galley until ground management arrives. I could lose everything. Ethan's voice came from behind her. People usually understand consequences only when they finally reach their own doorstep. Vanessa turned slowly. For one brief second, there was something human in her face. Fear, not remorse yet. Fear always came first. Remorse, if it came at all, would have to survive after the fear stopped being useful. I made a mistake, she said. Ethan stood still. No, you made a series of decisions. A mistake is spilling coffee. A mistake is entering the wrong code. You looked at me, decided I did not belong, ignored proof, created a false report, damaged my property, and hit me. Each sentence landed clean. No shouting, no waste. You did not lose control, he said. You used the control you thought you had. Vanessa's eyes dropped. No one saved her from that truth. Not the captain, not Olivia, not a silent couple in the back. For the first time since Ethan stepped onto the jet, the power in the room was not loud. It was not standing over someone. It was not pointing toward the back and calling it order. It was calm. It was documented. It was witnessed. Ethan sat down again and adjusted the cuff of his hoodie as if preparing for a business call instead of the aftermath of public humiliation. But Olivia saw his hand for 1 second before it settled. It trembled, just slightly. That was the part no one ever wanted to talk about. Even powerful people could be wounded. Even owners of jets could feel the sting of being reduced to a stereotype. Money could buy leather seats, private terminals, and polished wood cabins. It could not buy back the moment before someone decided your dignity was optional. Captain Hayes saw it, too. His expression changed. Less corporate now, more human. Mr. Brooks, he said quietly, would you like medical attention? Ethan took a slow breath. No, but I want the incident preserved. Every record, every camera feed, every crew statement, no deletions, no edits. Yes, sir. And Captain?
Yes?
Olivia stays on this flight. Olivia looked up, startled. Vanessa looked wounded by the decision, as if kindness towards someone else had become another punishment. Ethan continued. She is the only person in uniform who remembered that safety includes the truth. Olivia turned away quickly, wiping one tear before it could fall. The captain nodded. Understood. A black SUV pulled up outside the aircraft stairs. Through the window, Ethan saw two company officials step out, followed by a woman in a navy suit carrying a legal folder against her chest. Their faces were tight. Their walk was fast. The storm had arrived. Vanessa saw them too. Her breathing changed, shorter, shallower. For years she had worn authority like armor. But armor built from prejudice always had the same weakness. It only worked until someone refused to bow beneath it. Ethan looked out at the tarmac, then at the cabin, then at Vanessa. This will not end with your badge, he said. Vanessa whispered, what does that mean? Ethan's eyes stayed steady. It means we are going to find out who taught you that people could be treated this way, and who protected you when they already knew. The cabin door opened. Cold morning air rushed in, and for the first time, Vanessa Cole looked like she understood that the slap had not been the climax. It had been the beginning. The woman in the navy suit stepped into the cabin first, and the temperature seemed to drop with her. Her name was Rachel Mercer, General Counsel for Altair Lux Aviation. She was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, silver hair cut to her jaw, a leather folder pressed against her ribs like a shield. Behind her came Paul Whitman, Vice President of Flight Operations, a man who looked as if he had aged 5 years during the walk from the SUV to the aircraft stairs. Neither of them smiled. Rachel stopped just inside the cabin door. Her eyes moved fast. Vanessa in the forward galley. Olivia standing stiff near the service counter. Captain Hayes holding the crew tablet. Ethan Brooks seated in the owner's suite, cheeks still marked red beneath the soft cabin lights. For 1 second, no one spoke. Then Rachel inhaled. Mr. Brooks, she said, careful and formal. I am sorry this happened on one of our aircraft. Ethan looked at her. One of your aircraft? Rachel caught the correction before anyone else did. Her face tightened. On your aircraft, sir. Paul Whitman shifted his weight. His polished shoes gave a tiny squeak against the cabin floor. He looked at Vanessa, then looked away, as if eye contact might pull him into her fall. Vanessa stepped forward. Rachel, this has been blown completely out of proportion. Rachel turned to her slowly. Do not speak yet. Vanessa froze. It was the first order she obeyed all morning. Rachel set her folder on the conference table and looked at Captain Hayes. I need a clean timeline. Captain Hayes nodded. His voice was controlled, but there was anger underneath. Not loud anger.
Worse.
Professional anger. Miss Cole challenged Mr. Brooks about his seat. He showed a valid confirmation. She did not verify the owner profile. She attempted to move his personal bag. She dropped it. She filed a security note claiming aggressive conduct before I was notified. Then she struck him. Rachel's jaw moved once. Paul closed his eyes. Vanessa whispered, I did not strike him like that. Olivia looked up. The older woman in the rear said, yes, you did. Her voice was soft, but it carried. Vanessa turned toward her, wounded and furious at the same time. You do not understand the pressure crew members are under. The older woman held her gaze. Her name was Margaret Ellis. She had taught public school in Newark for 37 years before retiring. She had seen children humiliated by adults who called it discipline. She had seen fear dressed as authority. And she had stayed quiet too long today. I understand pressure, Margaret said. I do not understand cruelty. The words landed harder than shouting. Her husband, Arthur, reached for her hand. He did not speak this time. He simply nodded, and that small nod carried the weight of a sworn statement. Rachel looked at Olivia. You recorded part of the incident? Olivia's throat tightened. Yes, send it to me now, and do not delete the original. Olivia took out her phone. Her hand shook badly enough that Ethan noticed from across the aisle. Slow down, he said. Everyone looked at him. His voice was calm. You are not the one on trial. Olivia swallowed. That sentence loosened something in her chest. She tapped the screen and sent the file. A few seconds later, Rachel's phone vibrated. She opened the video. No one in the cabin moved. The sound came first. Vanessa's voice. Sharp, cold, you do not belong in this section. Then Ethan's voice. Low. I am in the correct seat. Then the scrape of a bag being yanked from leather. A thud. Olivia's small gasp. Vanessa again, louder now. Get out of the owner's suite. Then the slap. The sound cracked through the phone speaker and returned to the cabin like a ghost. Vanessa covered her mouth. Not because she was shocked by what had happened, because she was shocked by how it sounded when there was no uniform to hide behind. Rachel stopped the video. Silence. Outside, a baggage car beeped in reverse, somewhere across the tarmac. The ordinary sound made the moment feel even more real. The world had not stopped. That was the cruel thing. People could be harmed in a room full of witnesses, and outside, trucks still moved, clocks still ran, coffee still brewed. Rachel looked at Vanessa. You are suspended pending termination review. Vanessa's knees seemed to soften.
Termination?
Paul finally spoke, voice low. Vanessa, you assaulted a client. She snapped toward him. He did not look like a client. The second she said it, she knew. The words fell out naked. No policy around them, no safety language, no misunderstanding, just the truth. Rachel stared at her. Ethan did not blink. Olivia's eyes filled again, but this time not with fear, with recognition. There it was. The thing everyone had felt but no one had named. Paul whispered, Good God. Vanessa's face collapsed.
I meant,
she began. Ethan stood. The cabin seemed to brace. No, he said. You meant exactly what you said. Vanessa shook her head. I have served senators, governors, Fortune 500 executives. I know how to handle important people. Ethan stepped into the aisle, and that is the disease right there. His voice stayed measured, each word clear enough for every person to hear. You were trained to respect importance before humanity. So when you failed to recognize importance, you forgot humanity too. Margaret bowed her head. Arthur removed his glasses and wiped them slowly, though they were not dirty. Rachel did not interrupt. She was a lawyer. She knew when a statement mattered. Ethan looked at Paul.
How many complaints has she had?
Paul's face changed. That was the wrong face. Too fast, too guarded. Ethan saw it. Rachel saw it. Vanessa saw it too, and for one dangerous second, hope flickered in her eyes. Paul cleared his throat. I would need to pull the complete file. Ethan said, Pull it now. Paul hesitated. Mr. Brooks, personnel records require proper process. Ethan's expression did not change. I own the company that owns the process. Rachel turned to Paul. Pull the file. Paul took out his phone with stiff fingers. He walked toward the rear section and spoke quietly, but not quietly enough. I need Vanessa Cole's HR history, all complaints, not summaries, original reports. Vanessa stared at him. Paul. He did not look back. Rachel moved closer to Ethan. Sir, I need to advise you that we should preserve all communications and avoid making decisions in anger. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, a tiredness showed through the control. I am not angry because she hit me. Rachel waited. Ethan touched the torn seam of his bag. I am angry because I know this was not her first time making someone feel small. I am angry because someone before me did not have my name, my money, or my aircraft. Someone before me had to walk away swallowing it. His voice slowed. That is who I am thinking about. Olivia looked down, and a tear dropped onto the back of her hand. She thought of a passenger from 6 months earlier, a Latino grandfather who spoke limited English. Vanessa had mocked his accent when he asked for help with his seatbelt. Olivia had laughed nervously because everyone else did. She hated herself for that laugh now. The memory burned. Mr. Brooks, Olivia said. Her voice was small, but she forced it out. There were others. Vanessa turned on her. Stop. Olivia flinched, then looked at Ethan. There were others, she repeated, not always like this, not physical, but comments, different service, extra checks, complaints that disappeared. Rachel's eyes sharpened. Paul returned from the rear, phone still pressed to his ear. His face had gone gray. He lowered the phone. Rachel asked, "How many?" Paul looked at Ethan. "There are 9 formal complaints in the last 7 years." Vanessa whispered, "That is not fair." Paul continued, 5 from black passengers, 2 from Latino passengers, 1 from a Middle Eastern family, 1 from a junior crew member. The cabin absorbed each sentence like a wound reopening. Rachel's voice dropped. Disposition? Paul swallowed, closed as unsubstantiated. Most reviewed by Gerald Mason. Ethan's eyes narrowed.
Who is Gerald Mason?
Rachel answered this time. Director of Premium Service Operations. Captain Hayes looked away. He knew the name. Everyone in the company knew the name. Gerald Mason was the man who protected revenue producers and called it leadership. Ethan picked up his phone. "Get Gerald Mason on a secure call." Paul went still. "Sir Gerald is at the New York office." Then he has a phone. Rachel watched Ethan carefully. She had represented powerful men for decades. Some wanted blood. Some wanted headlines. Ethan wanted structure. That made him more dangerous than both. A minute later, Paul's phone rang on speaker. Gerald Mason's voice came through smooth and irritated. "Paul, I am walking into a meeting."
What is so urgent?
Ethan stepped closer. "This is Ethan Brooks." The line went silent. Then Gerald's tone changed. "Mr. Brooks, I was not aware you were on the aircraft." Ethan looked at Vanessa. "No," he said. "That seems to be a theme today." Gerald gave a nervous laugh that died quickly. Ethan continued, "I am standing in my cabin with a flight attendant who assaulted me after filing a false security note. I am told she had 9 prior complaints. Most were closed by you." A soft rustle came through the speaker. Papers, movement, panic looking for language. "Sir, I would need context before commenting." "You will have context," Ethan said. "You will have investigators. You will have counsel. You will have every original complaint reopened by the end of the day." Gerald's voice tightened. "Mr. Brooks, I strongly recommend we manage this internally before it becomes a reputational issue." Ethan looked out the window at the pale morning sky. It became a reputational issue the moment your company taught employees that dignity was optional unless the client looked rich enough to matter. No one breathed. Then Ethan ended the call. Vanessa stared at him, tears now slipping freely down her face. But the cabin had learned something by then. Tears did not erase harm. Fear did not become accountability just because it shook. Rachel closed her folder.
Mr. Brooks, what would you like us to do first?
Ethan looked at Olivia, then at Margaret and Arthur, then at the captain. "First," he said, "we take statements while memories are fresh." He turned to Vanessa. "Then we remove her from this aircraft with dignity, because even now she will receive more respect than she gave." Vanessa broke then, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a small sound from the throat, the sound of a person meeting the consequences they never thought would reach them. Ethan did not smile. This was not revenge. Revenge would have been easy. This was something heavier. This was correction. And corrections, when they come late, net always hurt. Vanessa Cole walked down the aircraft stairs with her uniform jacket folded over one arm and her eyes fixed on the concrete. No one dragged her. No one shouted. No one touched her. A ground supervisor walked beside her, close enough to guide, far enough to avoid humiliation. Ethan had insisted on that. It bothered some people in the cabin. They thought grace was too generous. But Ethan knew something they did not. If you wanted to expose cruelty, you could not become careless with another person's dignity just because they had been careless with yours. At the bottom of the stairs, Vanessa paused. Morning wind moved across the tarmac and lifted a strand of hair from her tight bun. For a second, she looked back at the jet. The polished white fuselage reflected the pale sky, the stairs, the open door, the people watching through oval windows. She looked less like a villain now, more like a woman who had spent too many years mistaking control for worth. Then the ground supervisor led her toward the black SUV. The door closed, and she was gone. Inside the cabin, no one spoke right away. The silence she left behind was not peaceful. It had weight. It had memory. Rachel Mercer sat at the conference table with a recorder placed in the center. Paul Whitman stood near the galley, scrolling through personnel files with the strained look of a man realizing how many warnings had passed through his hands without becoming action. Captain Hayes remained near the cockpit door, jaw tight, shoulders squared. Olivia stood beside him, still pale, still shaken, but no longer invisible. Ethan sat across from Rachel. The red mark on his cheek had deepened. Rachel glanced at it, then lowered her eyes to her notepad. For the record, she said, this statement is being taken at Teterboro Airport aboard aircraft 7 Apex prior to departure. Mr. Brooks, you may begin wherever you feel is most accurate. Ethan looked at the recorder. For the first time that morning, he seemed tired. Not weak, tired. There was a difference. He folded his hands on the table. I boarded the aircraft alone, he said. No staff, no security, no announcement. I took my assigned seat, miss. Cole approached and asked for proof that I belonged there. I provided it. She dismissed it. Rachel wrote quickly. Ethan paused. The cabin sounds became louder in the pause. The soft air vent. The distant beeping of a truck outside. Olivia's uneven breath. She did not ask the older white couple in the rear to prove they belonged, Ethan continued. She did not ask the captain to verify. She looked at me and decided the seat had more credibility than the man sitting in it. Margaret Ellis closed her eyes. Arthur squeezed her hand. Rachel's pen slowed. Ethan looked up. I have spent most of my adult life building companies that move freight, aircraft parts, medical supplies, food, and people. Systems matter to me. A system can save a life when it works. It can destroy one when people hide inside it. He touched his cheek lightly, then lowered his hand. This morning, your system gave Vanessa Cole a uniform, a tablet, and authority. She used all three badly. Paul swallowed. Rachel nodded once, understood. Then she turned to Olivia. Miss Reed, are you ready to give your statement? Olivia's eyes flicked toward Ethan. He gave her the smallest nod. She stepped forward. Her voice came out thin. I was in the galley preparing water when Miss Cole approached Mr. Brooks. I heard her ask for his confirmation. He showed his phone. She did not review the manifest. Rachel asked, did Mr. Brooks raise his voice? No. Did he threaten her? No. Did he make physical contact with her? No. Olivia's hand tightened around her phone. She told him to move to the back. He said he was in the correct seat. She took his bag. He stood and told her to put it down. He did not touch her. She dropped it. Then she filed something on her tablet. Paul looked up sharply. Olivia continued. I did not know what she filed until Captain Hayes opened it. But I saw her typing after she dropped the bag. Then she kept pushing him. I told her we should check the profile. Rachel leaned in. And what did she say? Olivia stared at the carpet. She said she did not need a trainee telling her how to recognize a problem passenger. The words made the cabin tighten again. Rachel wrote them down exactly. Olivia blinked hard. I should have spoken sooner. Ethan's voice came low from the table.
Yes.
Olivia looked at him, wounded. He did not soften the truth.
But you did speak,
he said. And that matters. Olivia nodded slowly. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a handhold. Then Margaret gave her statement. She did it sitting down, hands folded over her purse, the way she might have spoken to a principal after a school incident decades earlier. I saw a man being doubted for no reason I could name, except the obvious one, she said, and I stayed quiet because I did not want to make a scene. Her voice trembled. That is how scenes like this survive. Everyone waits for someone else to become brave. Arthur looked down at his shoes. I did the same. I knew it was wrong. I told myself it would pass. Then she hit him. His voice cracked on the last word. I am sorry, Mr. Brooks. Ethan took a breath. He could have said it was fine. People said that when they wanted discomfort to end quickly, but it was not fine. So he said something else. I hope next time you speak before the slap. Arthur nodded. His eyes watered. Yes, sir. That was the human part. Hard, painful, necessary. Healing did not begin with comfort. It began when people stopped lying about the wound. Rachel finished the statements and closed her folder. Then Paul's phone rang again. He looked at the screen and stiffened. It is Gerald Mason. Rachel looked at Ethan. Ethan said, "Answer it." Paul put the call on speaker. Gerald's voice came through tight and polished. "Paul, I have reviewed what I can from the office. I think we should be very careful about overreacting. Vanessa has a long record of high-end service. Some complaints are inevitable in premium aviation." Ethan leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Mason, are you aware that she struck me?" A pause. "I am aware there is an allegation." Olivia's head snapped up. Rachel's eyes went cold. Ethan smiled once, not warmly. "There is video." Another pause. Gerald adjusted quickly. "Then obviously that specific act must be addressed. But I would caution against framing this as systemic without a complete review." Rachel spoke now. "Gerald, 9 complaints over 7 years were closed under your supervision. I want the original investigator notes, emails, witness statements, and client correspondence preserved immediately." Gerald's voice sharpened. "Rachel, you know how sensitive those files are. I know how subpoenas work too," Rachel said. Paul stared at her. Gerald went quiet. Ethan said, "Mr. Mason, here is what will happen. You will not contact Vanessa Cole. You will not contact any complainant. You will not alter or remove any record. You will send a litigation hold notice within the hour." Gerald exhaled through his nose. "With respect, Mr. Brooks, you are new to this side of the operation. Premium clients expect discretion." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Discretion is not a burial ground." The sentence stopped the cabin. Gerald said nothing. Ethan continued. "You use polite words to hide ugly things. High-end service, discretion, client comfort. Those words became curtains, and behind them people were mistreated." Gerald's tone cooled. "I have protected this company for 12 years. "No," Ethan said. "You protected its comfort." The line went silent again. Then Ethan said, "Rachel will oversee preservation. Paul will remove your access to complaint files until the review is complete." Paul's eyes widened. Gerald snapped, "You cannot remove my access without board approval." Ethan's voice did not rise. "I am the board approval you should have worried about." No one moved. Even Rachel looked at him differently now. Not because of the power. She had seen power. Because he was using it with direction. Paul muted the call and stepped away to execute the order. Gerald's voice disappeared into silence. Outside, the black SUV that carried Vanessa was now a dark dot near the terminal. The plane still had not moved. The flight to Savannah was delayed. The acquisition meeting would have to wait. But Ethan did not look impatient. Some delays mattered. Some delays revealed what Speed had been hiding. Olivia stood near the galley, watching Rachel collect the documents. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. She looked at the empty place where Vanessa had stood and understood something she wished she had learned earlier. A uniform could give authority. It could not give character. Captain Hayes approached Ethan. "Sir, we can arrange a replacement attendant within 45 minutes. Ethan looked around the cabin. "No." The captain hesitated. "No? We are not flying to Savannah yet." Rachel looked up. Ethan stood. "I want a meeting at the terminal. Today. With operations, HR, legal, and every manager connected to those complaints." Paul returned from the rear, phone in hand. "Today?" Ethan turned to him. "People were humiliated for years. I can miss one meeting." The words settled over the cabin like a verdict. Then Olivia spoke, barely above a whisper. "What about the passengers who complained before?" Ethan looked at her. "We find them," he said. "We ask what happened. We listen. And this time, no one tells them it was unsubstantiated before they are even heard." Margaret wiped her eyes. Arthur sat straighter. Rachel reopened her folder. Captain Hayes nodded once, slowly, as if accepting a new flight plan. The engine outside remained silent, but inside that aircraft, something had already taken off. The conference room inside the terminal smelled like burnt coffee, printer toner, and stress. It sat above the private hangars at Teterboro, behind thick glass windows that overlooked rows of silent jets lined beneath the gray morning sky. Normally, the room hosted acquisition meetings, charter negotiations, and polished conversations between wealthy executives pretending to be relaxed. Today, nobody pretended. Rachel Mercer sat at the head of the table with 3 legal folders spread open in front of her. Paul Whitman stood near the wall, with his sleeves rolled up for the first time anyone in the company could remember. Captain Hayes sat quietly beside him, posture rigid, hands folded together. Olivia Reed remained near the back of the room. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Ethan Brooks entered last, still in the same hoodie, still carrying the damaged leather bag. Every executive in the room stood automatically when he walked in, not because anyone told them to, because power changes the oxygen in a room. Ethan nodded once. Sit down. No one spoke as he took his seat. At the far end of the table sat Gerald Mason, 59 years old, expensive suit, perfect silver tie, calm face built from decades of corporate survival. He looked composed until someone watched closely enough to notice his thumb rubbing the edge of his wedding ring over and over beneath the table. Gerald had spent years mastering the language of plausible denial, concerned passenger experience, operational discretion, premium brand protection. He knew how to bury harm under polished words, but polished words sound different once sunlight hits them. Rachel opened the meeting. At approximately 8:15 this morning, a physical and discriminatory incident occurred aboard Aircraft 7 Apex involving suspended employee Vanessa Cole and principal owner Ethan Brooks. Gerald shifted immediately. I would caution against using the word discriminatory before the investigation is complete. Ethan looked at him. Do you caution people the same way when they report turbulence? Gerald blinked.
What?
When the aircraft shakes, do you tell passengers not to call it turbulence until legal approves the wording? The room stayed still. Ethan leaned back in his chair. She saw a black man in casual clothes and decided he could not belong in the owner's suite. Then she ignored verification, created a false security concern, and hit him. What exactly would you like to rename that? Gerald opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Rachel slid a file across the table. These are the prior complaints. Gerald did not touch the folder. Paul finally spoke. His voice sounded tired.
Why were they closed?
Gerald answered quickly this time. Because none of them met the threshold for disciplinary action. Olivia looked down at the carpet. Her stomach twisted, hearing that sentence again. Threshold. She hated the word now. Ethan reached forward and opened the file himself. The first complaint came from a retired postal worker named Leonard Graves. Vanessa had repeatedly questioned whether his wife belonged in the premium lounge during a delayed charter in Miami. Closed. Miscommunication. The second came from a Latina physician traveling with her children. Vanessa allegedly accused one of the boys of stealing a first-class amenity bag. Closed. Passenger sensitivity issue. The third complaint made Ethan stop reading for a second. A black Air Force veteran named Robert Jenkins, age 72. Complaint summary. Passenger reported feeling humiliated after repeated seat verification in front of other guests. No action recommended. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at Gerald. You reviewed this one personally. Gerald cleared his throat. I review hundreds of complaints a year. And how many did you actually hear? Gerald frowned. I do not understand the question. Ethan pushed the file toward him. You heard policy, revenue, risk, brand image. Did you ever hear the people? The room fell silent again. Outside the window, rain began tapping softly against the glass. Olivia wrapped her arms tighter around herself. Captain Hayes finally spoke. I flew with Vanessa twice last year. There were comments. Everyone turned. Gerald stared at him.
You never filed anything.
The captain nodded once. That is true. Then why are we acting like this was known behavior? Captain Hayes looked straight at him. Because silence protects patterns. That sentence hit harder than shouting. Paul sat down slowly. For the first time that morning, he looked older than his title. He rubbed both hands over his face. My God, he muttered. We all saw pieces of this. Nobody answered him because it was true. People rarely become openly cruel overnight. Usually there are witnesses first. Nervous laughs. Quiet discomfort. Excuses. Tiny moments people decide are too inconvenient to challenge. Then one day the behavior becomes impossible to ignore, and everyone acts surprised. Rachel opened another folder. There is more. She slid printed emails onto the table. Internal messages. Managers joking about high-maintenance diversity complaints. Notes warning supervisors not to upset premium staff who generated high-value client retention. One email from Gerald himself. Vanessa can be abrasive, but she knows how to manage the right clientele. Olivia closed her eyes. Arthur Ellis whispered under his breath, Jesus. Gerald sat straighter. You are taking these communications out of context. Ethan looked at him carefully. No, context is exactly what finally arrived. Gerald's voice sharpened. You are emotional right now. The mistake happened instantly. Rachel looked horrified. Paul stared at the table. Captain Hayes exhaled slowly through his nose. Ethan stayed perfectly still. That stillness scared Gerald more than anger would have. You think this is about emotion? Ethan asked quietly. He stood. Rain streaked the windows behind him now. Gray sky, gray runway, a world washed colorless. My father drove trucks for 28 years, Ethan said. He wore work boots, so worn the soles leaned sideways. One night, after delivering equipment to a private airport in Detroit, security stopped him outside the gate and asked who he stole the truck from. The room listened. He came home angry, not loud angry, quiet angry, the dangerous kind. My mother asked why he looked sick. He said something I never forgot. Ethan paused. He said, no matter how hard some people work, there are rooms they must keep, proving they deserve to stand inside. Olivia's eyes filled again. Ethan looked around the table. This morning was not about one slap. It was about a culture that trained people to measure human value before offering dignity. Nobody moved. Rain tapped harder against the glass. Gerald looked down at the emails scattered across the table like evidence at a trial. No lawyer could stop anymore. I built premium operations for this company, he said quietly.
Do you know how hard that is?
Clients expect perfection. Margaret Ellis leaned forward from the corner seat where she had quietly listened for the past 20 minutes. No, she said softly. Clients expect respect. Wealthy people just convinced you those were the same thing. Gerald looked at her, stunned. Margaret continued. I taught children for 37 years. The hardest students were never the poor ones. They were the ones raised believing rules should bend around them. Arthur nodded slowly beside her. That poison does not stay in schools. It grows up. The room absorbed her words. Ethan looked at Rachel. What happens next? Rachel closed one folder and opened another. Immediate suspension for Gerald Mason pending board review. External investigation. Preservation orders company-wide. Independent review of all discrimination complaints over the last 10 years. Paul added quietly, and media exposure. Rachel nodded. There is already airport chatter. Someone in ground operations recognized your name on the incident hold. Gerald's face drained. The press cannot get this. Ethan looked at him. Why? Because people might finally hear what your passengers tried to say. Gerald's breathing became uneven. For the first time, he looked less like an executive and more like a man realizing the walls around his career were made of paper. Paul spoke carefully. Ethan. Once this goes public, investors will panic. Charter contracts may freeze. We could lose millions. Ethan stared out at the rain. Then he turned back. If protecting millions requires ignoring humiliation, then the company deserves to lose millions. Nobody argued, because deep down, everyone in that room already knew the truth. Money had protected the wrong things for too long. Rachel gathered the files together. We need to discuss settlement exposure. Ethan shook his head immediately. I am not interested in a payout. Gerald looked confused.
You are not?
No. Ethan picked up the damaged leather bag and placed it on the table. This cost less than $400. But what happened this morning cost more than money fixes. He looked directly at Olivia. You know what the worst part was? She swallowed.
What?
That none of it surprised me. The sentence hollowed the room. Olivia covered her mouth. Captain Hayes lowered his eyes. Even Rachel stopped writing, because that was the tragedy underneath everything else. Not the slap, not the scandal, the familiarity. Ethan took a slow breath. I am tired of successful Black people having survival stories attached to ordinary moments. No one interrupted. Rain rolled down the glass behind him in crooked silver lines. We should be allowed to sit in a seat without becoming a lesson. Silence. Heavy. Honest. Then Olivia finally spoke.
What do we do now?
Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he answered, "We build a company where the next person never has to ask that question." The room stayed still after that, not because people were afraid anymore, because for the first time all morning, they understood what accountability was supposed to sound like. Not revenge. Responsibility. By noon, the story had already started moving beyond the walls of the terminal, not publicly yet, not on television, but through phones, texts, private calls, the invisible bloodstream of corporate America. Pilots in Dallas were whispering about it between flights. A scheduler in Atlanta heard that a senior attendant had assaulted the owner of the company. Two mechanics in Newark argued over whether the rumor was exaggerated. In Miami, a customer service supervisor quietly reopened an old complaint file she had once been told to stop asking questions about. Truth spread strangely, first like smoke, then like fire. Inside the terminal conference room, the air had gone stale. Coffee sat untouched in paper cups. Rain still dragged slow lines down into windows overlooking the runway. Ethan Brooks remained standing near the glass. He had not changed clothes, had not covered the mark on his cheek, had not asked for privacy. Rachel Mercer watched him carefully from the table. She had spent 26 years protecting corporations from disaster. Usually that meant containing damage. Quiet settlements, carefully worded apologies, controlled narratives. But Ethan was doing something different. He was refusing to hide the wound, and that frightened people more than lawsuits. Paul Whitman's phone vibrated again. He checked the screen and cursed under his breath. Rachel looked up.
What now?
Paul swallowed. Internal staff forums. Rachel's expression hardened. How bad? Paul turned the screen toward her. Anonymous employee posts flooded the company intranet. I warned HR about Vanessa 2 years ago. Premium crews treat black clients differently all the time. Management only cares if wealthy passengers complain loudly enough. One post had already been shared hundreds of times. Everybody knew. Nobody wanted to be the first one to say it out loud. Olivia read the screen over Rachel's shoulder. Her stomach twisted because it was true. She remembered every moment she had stayed silent to protect her schedule, her evaluations, her future. Every nervous smile, every forced laugh. Every time she convinced herself something was not serious enough. Now all those moments sat inside her like stones. Captain Hayes noticed her expression.
You okay?
She nodded too quickly. No, she admitted a second later. The honesty surprised even her. The captain pulled out the chair beside him. Sit down. She sat slowly. You are not responsible for what she did, he said quietly. Olivia stared at the carpet. But I knew. The captain did not answer immediately because he knew something too. Years ago, he had once overheard a senior pilot refer to an Arab passenger as airport security waiting to happen. He had laughed awkwardly and walked away. He still remembered the shame of that laugh 15 years later. Silence has memory. Knowing and speaking are different battles, he finally said. Most people lose the second one. Olivia looked at him. You? The captain gave one tired nod.
Yes.
That mattered more than comfort would have. Across the room, Rachel's phone rang. She answered immediately. This is Mercer. Her expression changed. Not panic, calculation. She stood. The press has the video. The room froze. Paul rubbed both hands across his face. How? Rachel looked at Olivia. Olivia's eyes widened instantly. It was not me. I know, Rachel said. Then she looked toward Margaret Ellis. The older woman raised both hands slightly. Not us, either. Arthur nodded beside her. We have not called anyone. Rachel listened to the voice on the phone for another few seconds. Then she ended the call. A baggage coordinator recorded the aircraft delay log. Someone connected the tail number to Ethan's ownership filing. Then ground staff started talking. Paul whispered, Jesus Christ. Rachel looked at Ethan. National outlets are asking for comment already. Ethan finally turned from the window. His reflection disappeared from the rain-streaked glass.
What are they asking?
Rachel checked her phone. Whether the owner of Altair Lux Aviation was assaulted by a crew member during a discrimination incident. Nobody spoke. Because stripped of legal language, stripped of public relations strategy, that was exactly what happened. Paul started pacing. This will crush the stock. Ethan's eyes followed him calmly. A woman was humiliated on this company's aircraft 3 years ago for speaking Spanish to her daughter, Ethan said. Did the stock concern you then? Paul stopped walking. No, why not? Paul looked trapped. Because I did not know. Ethan nodded once. And now you do. That was the difference between ignorance and responsibility. Ignorance ends the moment truth arrives. After that, every choice becomes deliberate. Rachel sat back down slowly. We need a public response before rumors control the story. Gerald Mason was still on suspended access pending review, but he had already started texting board members privately. Rachel knew the pattern. People like Gerald never admitted collapse immediately. First came denial, then distance, then survival. Paul's phone buzzed again. This time he looked genuinely sick.
What?
Rachel asked. Paul stared at the screen. Vanessa. He answered reluctantly. Vanessa's voice came through shaky and uneven. Paul. There are reporters outside my apartment. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. How did they get your address? I do not know. Ethan's expression tightened for the first time in nearly an hour. Who leaked her name? No one answered, because everyone knew how modern scandals worked. Once information escaped, it spread faster than ethics could catch it. Vanessa sounded close to panic now. There are cameras downstairs. Someone yelled racist at me when I got out of the car. Ethan stepped forward immediately. Put her on speaker. Paul obeyed. Vanessa inhaled sharply when she heard Ethan's voice. Mr. Brooks, you need legal protection and transportation, Ethan said calmly.
Rachel will arrange it.
The room looked stunned. Even Rachel blinked. Vanessa sounded confused. After what I did. Ethan's face stayed hard. What you did was wrong. What strangers may do to you now can also become wrong. That sentence changed the room. Margaret Ellis pressed one hand gently against her chest. Arthur looked at Ethan with quiet disbelief. Olivia stared openly now, because compassion after humiliation is not natural. It requires discipline. Most people never learn it. Vanessa's breathing broke over the speaker. I do not understand you. Ethan answered softly. That is part of the problem. Silence. Then Rachel spoke. I will send security and temporary lodging. Vanessa whispered, thank you. But the gratitude sounded shattered, fragile, like someone realizing consequences and humanity could exist in the same room. The call ended. Paul looked at Ethan carefully. You still want to protect her? Ethan shook his head. No. I want to protect what happens to people when anger becomes entertainment. Rain hammered harder against the windows now. The runway lights blurred silver through the water. Rachel leaned back slowly. You realize the public may not understand that distinction. Ethan gave a tired smile. The public rarely understands distinctions at first. Captain Hayes spoke quietly from the corner. My father used to say character is how you behave when punishment would feel satisfying. Everyone looked at him. He shrugged once. He was a pastor. Margaret smiled sadly. He was right. Another notification lit up Rachel's phone. This time she read silently for several seconds. Then she looked at Ethan. The board wants an emergency remote meeting within the hour. Good. They also want to discuss financial containment. Ethan laughed once, not because anything was funny, because the sentence sounded so familiar. Containment, he repeated. He looked around the room slowly. That word has poisoned this company. No one argued. Ethan walked back toward the conference table and placed both hands against the polished wood surface. When passengers complained, you contained it. He looked at Paul. When employees warned management, you contained it. Then Rachel. When discrimination became visible, legal strategy became containment. His eyes moved across the room. But pain does not disappear because wealthy people manage to hide it from headlines. The room stayed still. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the runway. Olivia looked at Ethan carefully now, not with fear anymore, not even with awe, with understanding. She finally realized why his calm felt so powerful. It was not because he lacked anger. It was because he refused to let anger decide the kind of man he became. Rachel closed her folder. So what exactly do you want the company to become after this? Ethan answered immediately. Honest. Paul frowned slightly. That is not a business strategy. Ethan looked directly at him. It should have been. The thunder sounded closer this time. A plane lifted through the storm clouds outside, engines roaring low across the wet runway. Everyone in the room watched it climb, heavy, slow, fighting resistance all the way upward, then disappearing into gray sky. Olivia spoke softly without realizing she had said it out loud. That is what accountability feels like. Nobody corrected her because she was right. The board meeting began at 1:30 in the afternoon, and nobody looked comfortable. Faces filled the large monitor mounted at the front of the conference room. Men and women in expensive offices, glass towers behind them, framed degrees, city skylines, perfect lighting, controlled voices. But fear leaks through screens too. Ethan Brooks sat alone at the far end of the table with his damaged leather bag beside him and the red mark still visible against his cheek. He had refused makeup from the company medical staff, refused a private room, refused every attempt to soften the image. 'Cause softening the image was how people forgot what happened. A board member named Charles Dunleavy cleared his throat first. 71 years old, white hair, Connecticut accent polished by decades in corporate banking. Ethan, he began carefully, before we discuss operational response, I think we all want to express how unfortunate this incident is. Ethan looked at the screen. Unfortunate. The word drifted into the room like perfume over smoke. Rachel Mercer lowered her eyes slightly. She had heard executives use that tone for years. Fires were unfortunate. Weather delays were unfortunate. Data breaches were unfortunate. Humiliation was always described with softer words when powerful institutions caused it. Ethan folded his hands. A woman hit me after deciding I did not belong in my own aircraft, he said calmly. Let us not shrink the language now. Nobody interrupted. Another board member spoke up. Denise Holloway, former hospitality executive, mid-60s, sharp enough to survive rooms where softer women disappeared. What exactly are you proposing, Ethan? There it was. Not what happened. Not how are you.
What are you proposing?
Because boards understand damage through outcomes. Ethan stood slowly and walked toward the monitor. Rain still moved across the windows behind him. The gray afternoon light made the room feel colder than it was. I spent years buying distressed aviation companies, he said. Do you know the first thing I learned? Silence. Broken systems never begin where the public notices. Charles adjusted his tie. With respect, this appears to be an employee conduct matter. Ethan looked directly into the camera. No, it became an employee conduct matter because leadership ignored smaller warnings until they became public humiliation. Rachel watched the board members carefully now. Some defensive, some nervous, some finally beginning to understand. Ethan continued. Vanessa Cole did not invent that behavior this morning. She rehearsed it over years, quietly, safely, under protection. Paul Whitman sat rigid beside the wall. Every sentence felt aimed at him too. Because leadership always wants misconduct to belong to one person. It is easier that way. Cleaner. But cultures are built collectively. Silence is collective. Reward systems are collective. And everyone in that room knew it. Denise leaned forward toward her camera. What specifically do you believe failed? Ethan answered immediately. Incentives. The word landed hard. You train staff to prioritize perceived status over human dignity. Revenue over respect. Image over honesty. Charles frowned. That is a serious accusation. It is also documented. Rachel slid printed emails toward the camera feed one by one. Comments. Dismiss complaints. Internal jokes. Language that looked harmless until stacked together like bricks forming a wall. One board member removed his glasses slowly. Another muted himself to whisper something off screen. Then Gerald Mason appeared in the waiting queue requesting entry. Paul stiffened. Rachel looked at Ethan. Ethan nodded once. Let him in. Gerald's face appeared on screen. He looked worse now. Tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. The carefully controlled executive image had begun cracking around the edges. "Thank you," Gerald said immediately. "I deserve an opportunity to explain." Ethan sat back down. "Go ahead." Gerald inhaled deeply. "I want to begin by saying what happened to Mr. Brooks should never have happened, but I reject the idea that this company is institutionally discriminatory." Rachel's expression did not move. Gerald continued quickly. "We operate in luxury aviation. Staff are trained to identify security risks, irregular passenger behavior, unauthorized access. Sometimes judgments must be made quickly." Olivia closed her eyes briefly. There it was again, different language. "Same poison." Ethan spoke softly. "You still do not hear yourself." Gerald frowned. "I am speaking about operational realities." "No," Ethan replied. "You are describing assumptions with better vocabulary." The room stayed quiet. Gerald's jaw tightened. "With respect, Mr. Brooks, aviation safety depends on reading situations correctly." Captain Hayes finally spoke from the back of the room. "Then explain why no one asked the white passengers for verification." Gerald looked caught off balance for the first time. "That is not what I meant." "But it is what happened," the captain said. His voice stayed calm, but something underneath it had changed since morning. Less obedience now, more conviction. Margaret Ellis sat quietly near the corner of the room, listening to powerful people struggle to avoid plain truth. She had spent decades watching children learn one lesson above all others. Adults usually say fairness matters, until fairness becomes expensive. Gerald rubbed his forehead. This company serves elite clientele. Appearance, behavior, and presentation are part of security assessment. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "My father hauled freight in steel-toe boots for 30 years. You would have flagged him too." Gerald hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. Arthur Ellis spoke for the first time. "In nearly an hour, son," he said quietly toward the monitor. "There are people in this country who think wealth should look a certain way. The danger starts when companies train employees to trust that instinct." Gerald looked frustrated now. "This is becoming philosophical." "No," Ethan said. "It is becoming honest." Silence again, heavy. Then Denise asked the question nobody else wanted to ask. "What happens if this video becomes public tonight?" Rachel answered before Ethan could. "It will become national news by morning." Charles muttered something under his breath. Stock valuation, investor panic, brand exposure. The language of corporate fear began spreading through the meeting like smoke. Ethan listened quietly for almost a minute before speaking again.
Do you know what the real risk is?
Nobody answered. "It is not the video." The room stilled. "It is the possibility that thousands of people will watch it and recognize themselves." That sentence hit harder than any legal threat, because every person on that call knew he was right. Not everyone had been slapped, but many had been doubted, questioned, followed, watched differently, made to feel temporarily guilty for existing in expensive spaces. Olivia stared at Ethan. She realized something in that moment. The reason this story frightened executives was not because it was unbelievable. It was because it was familiar. Rachel's phone buzzed. She checked the screen and exhaled slowly. "What now?" Paul asked. "CNN has the footage. The room exploded at once." "How? Who leaked it? We need injunctions."
Can legal stop publication?
Rachel raised one hand sharply. "Enough." The room quieted. She looked directly at the board. "You cannot litigate your way out of moral failure." Nobody spoke after that. Even Charles lowered his eyes. Ethan stood again and walked slowly toward the rain-streaked windows. He remembered being 14 years old in Detroit, walking into a high-end electronics store, wearing his basketball hoodie after school. The security guard followed him through every aisle for 20 minutes. He remembered the shame of pretending not to notice. That memory still lived in his body decades later. That was the part people did not understand about humiliation. The body remembers even when the mind tries to move on. He turned back toward the room. "I am not interested in destroying this company," he said. The board members looked surprised. "I am interested in finding out whether it deserves to survive." No one breathed. Then Ethan looked directly into the camera at Gerald Mason. You protected revenue producers instead of protecting standards. Gerald started to respond. Ethan cut him off. And somewhere along the way, you taught employees that wealthy-looking deserved patience, while everyone else had to earn basic respect. Gerald's face hardened defensively. That is unfair. Margaret Ellis spoke softly from the corner. No, unfair is what happened before cameras showed up. The room went still again. Outside, another aircraft lifted through the storm clouds, engines roaring low over the wet runway. The sound filled the silence. Ethan looked at Rachel. I want an independent review team assembled tonight. Rachel nodded immediately. Done. I want every unresolved complaint reopened. Done. I want mandatory bias and conduct review for premium crews and executives. Paul looked up sharply. Executives too? Ethan looked directly at him.
Yes.
Especially executives. Nobody argued. Because everyone finally understood something simple and brutal. Cultures are not created by the worst employee in the building. They are created by what leadership chooses to ignore. And for the first time since morning, the people in that room realized they were no longer discussing public relations. They were discussing conscience. By 6 that evening, the video was everywhere. Not edited, not dramatized, just raw footage. Vanessa Cole standing in the aisle of the aircraft with anger tightening her face. Ethan Brooks seated calmly beneath the soft cabin lights. The sound of the bag hitting the floor, Olivia's nervous voice. Then the slap. Millions of people watched it before dinner. Millions more watched before midnight. Some watched with outrage. Some with recognition. Some with the sick silence of people remembering moments they never told anyone about. Inside Altair Lux Aviation headquarters in Manhattan, entire departments had stopped pretending to work. Screens glowed in offices. Assistants whispered in hallways. Phones rang without pause. The company's stock had already dropped 11% before markets even closed. But the financial damage no longer felt like the center of the story. The human damage did. Ethan Brooks stood alone inside a private office overlooking the city. Night rain blurred Manhattan into streaks of white and red light below him. His hoodie hung over the back of a chair now. The mark on his cheek had faded slightly, but not enough. Rachel Mercer entered quietly, carrying a tablet and 2 untouched coffees. You should eat something, she said. Ethan did not turn around.
So should you?
Rachel gave a tired smile. She placed the coffees down anyway. Press conference starts in 40 minutes. Ethan nodded once. Any word from Vanessa? Rachel hesitated. She has not left the hotel. Ethan looked back finally.
And Gerald?
Rachel's expression hardened. He hired outside counsel. Claims he is being scapegoated. Ethan looked toward the rain again. Of course he did. People like Gerald always believed accountability was persecution once consequences finally arrived. Rachel studied Ethan carefully. You know you do not have to do this tonight. Yes, I do. The board can issue a statement. That is the problem, Ethan said quietly. Companies have statements for everything. People are starving for honesty. Rachel leaned against the desk. You are carrying this personally. Ethan gave a short laugh. A woman hit me because she thought I could not afford the seat I was sitting in. Rachel nodded slowly. Fair point. The city hummed beneath the windows. Sirens somewhere downtown. Rain against glass. Helicopter blades chopping distant air. Then Rachel's tablet vibrated. She checked it. Her face changed.
What?
She turned to the screen toward him. Another video. Older. Security footage from a private terminal lounge 2 years earlier. Vanessa again. A black family standing beside a check-in counter while Vanessa questioned their credentials in front of other passengers. The father holding printed confirmations with embarrassed fury in his eyes. A little girl clutching a stuffed rabbit while staring at the floor. Ethan watched silently. At the end of the footage, the mother guided the child away while the father remained behind arguing quietly with staff. No shouting, no scene, just humiliation. The kind people survive privately every day. Rachel lowered the tablet. That family already contacted the investigation team. Ethan sat down slowly. What did they say? Rachel's voice softened. The daughter is 15 now. She saw the video online this morning. and recognized Vanessa immediately. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The little girl with the rabbit stayed in his mind. Not because the scene was dramatic, because it was ordinary. That was the real horror of it. Ordinary humiliation leaves deeper scars than explosive cruelty. It teaches children lessons too early, lessons about where they are welcome, about how carefully they must behave in certain rooms. Rachel sat across from him. She said something else. Ethan looked up.
What?
She told investigators, "I thought maybe we really looked suspicious." The room went quiet. Ethan leaned back slowly. That sentence hit harder than the slap ever could, because prejudice always tries to become the victim's voice eventually. That is how it survives. Not just by hurting people, by teaching them to doubt themselves afterward. Rachel watched Ethan carefully now. His expression had changed again. Less anger, more grief. The dangerous thing about dignity being denied repeatedly is that eventually people begin negotiating with their own worth just to survive. Ethan spoke quietly. That child carried their shame instead of Vanessa's. Rachel nodded once. Yes. A long silence followed. Then Ethan stood. "Get me the family's contact information." Rachel frowned slightly. "For legal outreach?" "No." He grabbed his hoodie from the chair. "For an apology." The press conference room downstairs was already crowded by the time Ethan entered. Cameras, microphones, reporters shoulder to shoulder beneath harsh, white lighting. The low roar of voices filled the room until he walked in. Then silence spread outward in waves. People noticed immediately that he still wore no suit, no polished executive armor, just dark slacks and the same plain hoodie from the aircraft. A reporter from Chicago raised her hand first. "Mr. Brooks, are you planning legal action against Vanessa Cole?" Ethan stepped behind the podium. "No." The room shifted. Another reporter spoke quickly. "Then what exactly are you seeking?" Ethan looked across the cameras. Truth. Pens moved immediately. Flashes burst. He continued. "This morning, a woman looked at me and decided I could not belong in a luxury aircraft because of how I looked." Another flash. "But this story is not important because I own the company." He paused. "It is important because most people in that situation would not." Silence. Deep silence. Some reporters lowered their pens completely now. Ethan's voice remained steady. "If this happened to me, with all my resources, all my access, all my power, then what happens to people without those protections?" The room listened differently after that. Not scandal now, reflection. A reporter near the back asked, "Do you believe this was racism?" Ethan answered immediately. "Yes," no hesitation, no corporate wording, just truth. "But racism is not only hatred," he continued. "Sometimes it looks like lowered patience, extra suspicion, shorter grace, different assumptions." Margaret Ellis watched the broadcast from the terminal lounge with Arthur beside her. When Ethan said those words, she reached for her husband's hand again, because she knew exactly what he meant. Ethan continued at the podium. "The danger is not only in cruel people. It is in ordinary people who learn to excuse cruelty when it feels inconvenient to challenge." Olivia watched from the side of the room. Her chest tightened, because he was talking about her too, and somehow not condemning her while still telling the truth. That balance felt almost impossible. One reporter raised her voice over the others. "Mr. Brooks, what happens to Vanessa Cole now?" The room sharpened instantly. Everyone wanted punishment. Public anger always hungers for a face. Ethan looked down briefly before answering. "She will face consequences." He looked back up. "But I will not participate in destroying her life for sport." The room went still. She made harmful choices, serious ones. But if accountability becomes cruelty, then we learn nothing. Rachel watched reporters exchange looks. This was not the script they expected. They expected revenge. Americans understood revenge. Grace confused them. Another reporter spoke carefully. "Do you forgive her?" Ethan paused longer this time. The room held his breath. "I understand her humanity," he said finally. "Forgiveness takes longer." No one wrote for several seconds after that, because the answer felt real. Not polished, not performative, real. Back at the hotel across town, Vanessa Cole sat alone on the edge of the bed, watching the broadcast with swollen eyes and both hands wrapped around a paper cup gone cold hours earlier. She looked destroyed, not because Ethan attacked her, because he refused to. That hurt worse. Every cruel assumption she had made about him kept collapsing one by one in public. When the reporter asked if she should lose everything, Vanessa stopped breathing for a second. Then Ethan said quietly into the microphones, "No human being should be reduced to the worst moment of their life. But every human being must answer for the harm they cause." Vanessa covered her mouth, and for the first time since morning, she cried for someone other than herself. Not for her career, not for the cameras, for the little girl holding the stuffed rabbit in that old airport footage, the child she had taught to feel out of place. The child who walked away believing maybe she really did not belong there. That realization finally broke through the armor. Not fear, not scandal, truth. And truth, once it finally enters a room, changes everyone inside it. The next morning, the elevators inside Altair Lux Aviation headquarters moved slower than usual, not mechanically, emotionally. People stepped inside without speaking. Eyes stayed lowered. Phones stayed clutched tightly in nervous hands. Every television in the building carried the same headline across the bottom of the screen. Airline ogre calls out culture of quiet discrimination. Employees moved through the marble lobby with the strange stiffness that follows public shame. Some looked angry, some embarrassed, some relieved that someone had finally said what many already knew. At 8:10 in the morning, Olivia Reed walked through the revolving doors, carrying a paper coffee she had no intention of drinking. Conversation stopped when she entered the lobby, not openly, subtly. A receptionist glanced up too quickly. Two attendants near the security desk suddenly became interested in their phones. A maintenance supervisor gave Olivia a small nod of respect as she passed. That part confused her most. Respect. 24 hours earlier, she had felt invisible. Now people looked at her as if bravery had always come naturally to her. It had not. She had barely slept all night thinking about all the moments she almost stayed quiet. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor. Rachel Mercer stood waiting near the glass conference room with 3 folders tucked under one arm. "You are early," Rachel said. Olivia shrugged weakly. "Could not sleep." Rachel nodded like she understood completely. Because she did. Entire industries are built on silence. Once silence breaks, people start hearing their own conscience again. It keeps them awake. Inside the conference room, Ethan Brooks sat alone reviewing printed reports spread across the table. Sunlight pushed weakly through the cloudy Manhattan morning and reflected across the polished wood surface. The mark on his cheek had nearly disappeared now, but something else had changed in him. He looked heavier, not physically, spiritually. Olivia noticed immediately. Ethan looked up as she entered. Morning, sir." He gave a small smile. "You can stop calling me sir every sentence." Olivia almost smiled back. Almost. Rachel placed the folders down. More complaints came in overnight. Ethan leaned back slowly. "How many?" Rachel opened the first folder. 27. Olivia's breath caught. 27. Not rumors, not social media comments, formal accounts, passengers, employees, contract workers. Stories that had waited years for permission to exist publicly. Rachel opened another folder. One former attendant resigned after repeated complaints about biased treatment assignments. Another says she was warned not to challenge senior premium staff if she wanted promotion opportunities. Ethan rubbed his hand slowly across his jaw. And Gerald? Rachel's expression flattened, officially suspended pending board review, unofficially calling every executive contact he has left. Olivia sat quietly near the end of the table, listening. The strange thing about institutional failure is that once it cracks open, everyone suddenly remembers details they once buried. A joke, a comment, a nervous feeling in the stomach, a moment they ignored because confronting it would have complicated their lives. The conference room door opened. Paul Whitman entered looking exhausted. No tie today. No polished executive mask either. Just a man carrying consequences on his shoulders. He placed a newspaper on the table, front page. Ethan's photograph leaving the aircraft. Headline beneath it.
Who gets believed in America?
Paul sat down heavily. The board wants immediate restructuring proposals. Ethan looked at the paper but did not touch it. Good. Paul exhaled slowly. You really are not trying to protect the company's image anymore. Ethan finally looked at him. No. I am trying to protect its soul. The sentence settled into the room, because every person there understood the difference. Image asks how things look. Soul asks what things are. Paul rubbed tired eyes. You know what scares me most? Nobody answered. I genuinely thought we were one of the good companies. Rachel gave a sad smile. Most organizations do. That was the problem with moral blindness. Truly cruel systems rarely describe themselves as cruel. They call themselves professional, efficient, exclusive, prestigious. Olivia stared down at her untouched coffee. Then she spoke quietly. I keep thinking about the little girl with the rabbit. The room softened immediately. Ethan looked at her. She contacted us this morning. Olivia blinked. She did? Ethan nodded. Her name is Naomi. Rachel slid a printed email across the table. Naomi is 15 now. She wrote that watching the press conference made her cry because it was the first time she saw someone powerful describe exactly how that day felt. Olivia pressed one hand against her mouth. The room went silent again. Then Ethan spoke quietly. That is why this matters. Not lawsuits, not stock prices, not headlines. The child who walked away believing she was suspicious simply for existing in the wrong room. Paul stared at the rain streaks drying slowly on the windows. I spent 30 years building premium aviation, he murmured. And somehow we forgot that luxury without dignity is just expensive humiliation. Rachel looked at him carefully. That realization may save this company yet. The door opened again. A junior legal assistant stepped inside looking nervous.
Mr. Brooks? Yes?
There is someone downstairs asking to see you.
Who?
The assistant hesitated. Vanessa Cole. The room froze. Olivia's fingers tightened around the coffee cup instantly. Paul looked stunned. Rachel's expression sharpened immediately. No. Ethan looked at her. She should not be here, Rachel continued. Not while legal review is active. The assistant swallowed nervously. She says she does not want lawyers. She wants 5 minutes. Ethan stood slowly. Rachel stepped closer immediately. I strongly advise against this. Ethan looked toward the windows for a long moment, then back at Rachel. Sometimes legal advice and human responsibility are different things. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. 5 minutes, she said finally, and I stay in the room. 10 minutes later, Vanessa Cole entered the conference room looking nothing like the woman from the aircraft. No makeup, hair loose and uneven, dark circles beneath swollen eyes. She carried no purse, no phone in her hands, no defensive posture left, just exhaustion. Olivia barely recognized her. Vanessa stopped near the doorway. Nobody invited her to sit. For a few seconds, she simply looked at Ethan, then at the floor. I watched your press conference, she said quietly. Ethan did not answer. Vanessa's voice trembled. I kept waiting for you to humiliate me. Silence. But you did not. She swallowed hard. That made it worse. Rachel stayed motionless beside the wall. Paul looked deeply uncomfortable. Olivia could barely breathe. Vanessa reached into her coat pocket slowly and removed a folded piece of paper. My resignation. Rachel stepped forward to take it, but Vanessa held on to it for another second. I know I deserve to lose my job, she whispered. Maybe more than that. Her eyes finally lifted toward Ethan. But I need you to know something. Ethan waited. I never thought of myself as racist. The room stayed completely still. Vanessa laughed weakly through tears. I know how stupid that sounds now. No one interrupted her, because this part mattered too. Most prejudice survives inside ordinary people who believe cruelty belongs only to monsters. Vanessa looked down at her hands. My father used to tell me successful people looked a certain way, spoke a certain way, carried themselves a certain way. Her voice cracked, and somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing people before categories. Ethan watched her carefully, not forgiving, not condemning, listening. Vanessa wiped both eyes quickly. When I saw that little girl from the old footage, She stopped to steady her breathing. I realized I taught a child to feel ashamed in a place her family paid to be. The words broke apart at the end. Olivia looked away. Because remorse sounds different when it is real, less theatrical, more devastating. Vanessa looked back at Ethan. I cannot undo what I did. No, Ethan said quietly. You cannot. She nodded once. But I needed to say I finally understand the damage. Ethan studied her face for a long moment. Then he asked softly, do you? Vanessa's eyes filled again. Yes. The room stayed silent after that. No dramatic speeches. No miracle redemption. Just the painful sound of a human being finally seeing herself clearly. And sometimes that is the hardest moment of all. 3 months later, the owner's suite on aircraft Cessna F and Apex looked exactly the same. Same cream leather seats, same polished walnut walls, same soft cabin lighting glowing against the windows before sunrise. But the people inside the company were no longer the same. Olivia Reed noticed it first. Not during meetings, not during press interviews, during boarding. Passengers were greeted differently now. Slower, more carefully. Employees checked themselves before assumptions could form. There was less performance in the kindness, less selective warmth. The company had changed because people finally understood something simple. Respect means nothing if it only appears for people who look expensive. Olivia adjusted her Navy uniform and watched passengers step into the aircraft one by one from the galley entrance. An older black couple boarded first. The husband wore work boots with paint dried along the edges. The woman carried a worn denim bag against her shoulder. They looked nervous, stepping into the premium cabin, the same way many passengers did when life finally gave them something they once thought belonged to somebody else. Olivia smiled warmly. Welcome aboard,
Mr. and Mrs. Carter.
The woman blinked in surprise. You already know our names? Olivia nodded gently. We are glad you are here. The husband's shoulders relaxed almost immediately. Tiny moment, huge difference. That was how dignity worked. Not grand speeches, not headlines. Moments, small ones, human ones. Behind the cockpit door, Captain Hayes reviewed departure clearance, while sunlight slowly stretched across the runway outside. His hair looked grayer than it had 3 months earlier. Stress did that. So did honesty. The independent review had become brutal. 34 employee complaints reopened. 12 managers removed. Gerald Mason resigned before the board could terminate him publicly. His final statement blamed misinterpreted leadership standards. Nobody believed him anymore. Vanessa Cole disappeared completely from aviation. No interviews, no lawsuits, no television appearances defending herself. Just silence. Rachel Mercer later learned Vanessa had moved back to Ohio to care for her sick mother and started volunteering at a community legal aid center 3 afternoons a week. People online wanted destruction, but real life rarely looks like public revenge fantasies. Sometimes consequences arrive quietly. Sometimes growth does too. The aircraft door closed softly. Olivia walked down the aisle, checking seatbelts and carry-on bags. As she passed the owner's suite, she slowed. Ethan Brooks sat by the window, wearing another simple hoodie and reading through a stack of reports with reading glasses low on his nose. No entourage, no dramatic entrance. Just a man traveling for work. Olivia smiled slightly. You ready for Savannah this time? Ethan looked up and smiled back. Depends. Anybody planning to slap me today? Olivia laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised both of them. Not because it was funny, because healing sounds strange the first time it appears after pain. The engine started outside with a low rolling vibration beneath the cabin floor. Passengers settled deeper into their seats. Coffee steamed from ceramic cups. Rain clouds had finally disappeared from New York, leaving behind a pale blue morning sky. Captain Hayes stepped briefly into the cabin before departure. He stopped beside Ethan's seat. We are cleared for takeoff, sir. Ethan nodded. Then the captain hesitated. There is something else. Ethan looked up. Captain Hayes lowered his voice slightly. I wanted to thank you. Ethan frowned faintly.
For what?
The captain glanced around the quiet cabin. For forcing people like me to stop calling silence professionalism. The words sat between them for a moment. heavy, honest. Ethan closed the folder in his lap. My father used to say silence is expensive. Somebody always pays for it eventually. Captain Hayes nodded slowly. Then he returned to the cockpit. The aircraft began moving across the tarmac with smooth, controlled motion. Outside the window, maintenance crews stopped working briefly to watch the jet pass. Everyone in aviation knew the story now. Training programs across the country had started using the footage privately in ethics seminars. Hospitality schools discussed it in classrooms. Human resources conferences cited it in presentations about institutional bias and selective empathy. One moment on one airplane had forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. Not because the incident was unique, because it was familiar. That was the uncomfortable truth underneath everything. Millions of Americans saw themselves somewhere inside the story. The passenger who stayed quiet, the employee who ignored discomfort, the manager who protected image before fairness, the person judged before speaking, the child who learned too early that some rooms require proof of belonging. Ethan looked out the oval window as the aircraft turned toward the runway. For a brief second, he remembered his father again. Steel-toe boots, tired eyes, hands rough from decades of labor. A good man constantly asked to prove himself in rooms built by people who looked past him. Ethan wished his father had lived long enough to see this moment. Not the headlines, not the power, the change. The possibility that maybe some young black kid boarding a flight years from now would walk into a premium cabin and feel normal instead of watched. That mattered more than revenge ever could. The aircraft accelerated hard down the runway, faster, louder. Buildings blurred past the windows. Then the nose lifted, and the ground fell away beneath them. Olivia stood in the galley during ascent, with one hand resting against the cabinet wall. Her reflection stared back faintly from the polished metal coffee machine. 3 months earlier, she almost stayed silent. That truth still hurt, but now she understood something important. Courage does not always arrive before fear. Sometimes it arrives after shame, sometimes after failure, sometimes after watching another human being refuse to lose their dignity even while being humiliated. Rachel Mercer sat 2 rows behind Ethan, reviewing updated company policies on her tablet, new reporting structures, mandatory ethics escalation, independent passenger advocacy review, anonymous employee protection systems. All things the company should have built years earlier. Still, late was better than never. Arthur and Margaret Ellis watched the clouds outside from the rear cabin. They had stayed in touch with Ethan after the incident. Margaret now spoke at teacher conferences about quiet prejudice and public courage. Arthur squeezed her hand gently. "You changed lives that day," he whispered. Margaret shook her head softly. "No, truth did." The aircraft climbed higher through bright morning light. Below them, New York shrank into silver rivers and tiny grids of moving traffic. Inside the cabin, people relaxed into ordinary travel again. And maybe that was the most meaningful part of all. The world did not heal through dramatic endings. It healed through ordinary moments becoming safer for ordinary people. Ethan opened his folder again. Business reports, flight schedules, acquisition numbers, life continuing forward. But before returning to work, he looked once around the cabin. Passengers talking softly. Olivia helping an elderly woman with her blanket. Sunlight across polished wood. Peace. Real peace. Not silence hiding harm. Peace built from honesty. The aircraft disappeared into the clouds. And somewhere far below, millions of people were still replaying that video online. Not because of the slap. Not because the victim turned out to be powerful. Because deep down, they recognized the lesson underneath it. A person's worth should never depend on whether the world thinks they look important. If this story stayed with you, take a second to like and subscribe so more people can hear stories that remind us what dignity really looks like. And if you believe respect should never depend on status, comment these 3 words below. Justice must win.